Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We're going to talk about how VTEX transformed their agreements process using DocuSign CLM. I am Gabi Castro. I am a senior project manager here at Spaulding Ridge. And today I have Luzia Amorim here with me. Luzia is the co-head of legal and data protection at VTEX. And for those of you who don't know VTEX yet, they are a global e-commerce company. They were born in Brazil as a small startup that they grew into a global business with offices in 18 countries and clients in over 32 countries. They work basically providing the whole infrastructure behind their clients' online stores. On top of being the co-head of legal, Luzia was also the leader of our project to implement DocuSign CLM. The project was to implement CLM from zero, integrate it with Salesforce, and we had 9 countries implemented within 6 months, and we reached 80% of adoption in 4 months, which was a great teamwork with different areas, different time zones and departments, and was for sure a huge success. Luzia, thanks for being here with us. And to start, could you talk a little bit about VTEX and the moment that you were facing when you chose DocuSign CLM and to partner with us?
Sure, Gabby. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And as you said, VTEX is originally a Brazilian company, and we are 20 years old now, but we have expanded a lot. We started as a Brazilian company, but today we're globally acting and providing services for clients over 32 countries. And the moment right before we looked into choosing the CLM tool and internalizing this in our process, we were living a very peculiar moment, which was actually a global peculiar moment, which was COVID-19 pandemic. As a technology company, we were very affected, right? Because those clients who already had their online stores with us saw their business grow, and they were selling more and more online and less in physical stores. And those potential clients who we were trying to bring to the digital world, we were able to do so because of COVID-19. So we saw our business basically boom, and something that was in our process on our project of becoming a global brand and becoming a global company with worldwide clients was the IPO, which is us being listed in publicly in the United States. This was actually in our roadmap for, I don't know, 5 years ahead maybe, and the COVID-19 accelerated our growth process. So by July 2020, we were thinking, okay, so if we want to do an IPO, we want to be listed in the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, we need to be ready. And what does this readiness mean for us? And in the end of the day, it means having to implement a lot of processes and governance inside the company, which is very hard for a company that started off as a startup, because we always have the mentality of growing quick and being bold and expanding our business in a very informal manner most times. So we were thinking, how can we better organize our processes? And that's where I came in. And as a legal leader, I had to think about how to organize our contractual processes, but also how to do that in a way that wouldn't impact the company culture and that would allow us to keep growing and do the IPO, even so being organized, but also not impacting negatively in our, for example, sales team. So that's when we started looking for these tools. We started looking at the market and saying, okay, so I need something that will basically control and access all the contract life management cycle. And yeah, that's basically where we were right before we chose CLM as our tool.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned COVID, and as you told us, being a technology company, right? You also faced a lot of challenges when COVID hit, and we have been hearing from different clients on that, on how they were like suddenly all the offices are closed, and you had your contracts right in the office with you, and then you're like, oh, I need this contract. How do I migrate that? How do I find this if I can't leave home? And even with a technology company, you were facing this kind of situation. So you mentioned the moment that VTEX was facing, you mentioned that you guys were planning for the IPO, which for those of you who doesn't know, happened around a month ago and was a success. So as the co-head of the legal team, could you tell us a little bit more about the challenge your department was experiencing when you started to look for a CLM tool?
Sure, Gabby. You hit right in one of our big pain points, which was our physical contracts. We had a lot of physical contracts in the offices. We weren't able to get to them, and most of the time, we didn't even have some of them digitalized. So this actually has to do with our lack of visibility of where our contracts were. We didn't know where the physical ones were stored. I mean, the thing is, the origin of this problem is basically that VTEX grew as a startup very decentralized, which gave a lot of autonomy to each area to negotiate contracts, have their own templates, and what made sense to their regional business or what was needed to sell and to grow. But at a certain point, this started becoming a problem because we started losing track of which contract was valid, which was the latest version of this contract that was implemented with a partner or a client. So we started thinking, we don't have visibility of this 100%. So this was a big, big problem. So actually, before we thought of CLM, I think about 2016, 17, we implemented Salesforce, which I think is important to say as well. It is a sales tool. It is not a contract life management tool, but it helped us at a certain point to organize a little bit our sales contracts. And why was that? Because the tool basically follows, and I don't know if most of you know what Salesforce is, but it's a tool that follows the life cycle of the sales process, right? The salesperson creates an opportunity in this tool, and then it says, okay, so I send out a proposal to the client, and then the final stage usually is the contract part. So this was when we manually inputted the contract inside Salesforce, and this gave us a little bit of, organization. It gave us a little bit, of fresh air and a little bit of more process and organization in keeping track of what we had in our contracts. But still, it was a very manual process because the salesperson had to get this contract and manually put it inside the system. Human error happens, like sometimes we didn't input these contracts, and I think people that are out there listening maybe have faced this before in their organizations, like how to make sure that the processes are being followed if they're not automatized. This is very hard. So even though we had Salesforce and we were taking care of our sales contract, we still had no 100% visibility of which contracts were valid and where they were. Another problem was we didn't have a lot of control over workflows. So basically, who was dealing which type of contract, who allowed a certain clause to be authorized, negotiated at some point. So let's say we were negotiating a sales contract, but then we needed an approval for a different type of clause for payment. I don't know, maybe your governance rule says that it's a 15-day payment and the client is asking for a 30-day payment. You need to get approval, probably, in VTEX you need to get approval from the finance team. So where was this registered? Did this approval actually happen? So we weren't getting track of this, and this was getting very lost, and this was a problem because if you had problems with the contract afterwards, you wouldn't know who approved that and how the life management of this contract was dealt. And you can imagine that VTEX started off in Brazil, as I said, and became a worldwide company. Basically, this became a worldwide problem. So as we grew, we were trying to solve problems also for the past, but also thinking about the future. How could we expand in a safe manner, Gabby, if we weren't doing, solving a problem in the past? So we needed more controls. And also another important point is that with this global expansion, we were having a lot of different templates in different languages with different legislations being applied. So by the time we were looking for this tool, we were also standardizing our templates and making sure that when we chose this tool, if we chose it, at that time we were actually evaluating if it made sense, we would need the templates to be standardized for us to mitigate our risks even more. And the template standardization was also important So we were working on this process. Another big problem that we had was sometimes because of this decentralization, we didn't know if the people who were signing the contracts had the power to do so. So did they have POAs in place for them to be signing these contracts and entering agreements with other third parties? So we thought that, well, we all obviously trust people who work inside the organization, but people leave and we lose track of the history of what was happening in the past. And lastly, because of IPO, we were worried for auditing purposes. Obviously, we already had auditing processes before, but with the IPO, it would be much, much stricter. How would we know where these contracts were, how many contracts there were, what was the content of these contracts? Because this is also very important. We knew very superficially and a very high level what we were entering into in these agreements. So we couldn't generate reports regarding the content of these agreements. And this was something that was getting lost, like what we were entering into. When we're talking about an IPO, we're talking about Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, which is a very strict compliance legislation that we have to follow through. So at that point, we thought, how can we, escalate this process? And the solution was simple. I mean, we needed to automatize this somehow, and also thinking about what I said before. How can we implement this process of automatizing without being a big problem culture-wise? And one thing that we identified is that actually the tool would be helpful for the salespeople, because in the end of the day, the whole mess and the whole not knowing and lack of knowledge of where these contracts were or what was being negotiated was also making the process of sales people closing the deals slower. And why is that? Because contracts got lost in emails. People didn't know which was the last version. And because there wasn't a tool tracking the whole process, information got lost. And then the salespeople would be like, okay, so I lost, like, I don't know, 2 days of my life trying to negotiate this contract. And then if I had a tool to track it or to organize it better, things would be much, much smoother and faster for the salespeople as well. So we started looking for this, and then Gabby, basically, we needed a solution that would solve our problem fast as well. So that's when we looked you guys up.
Yeah, and I'm glad you summarized so many challenges that I believe a lot of companies out there are also facing right now. And the final touch that you mentioned, you need it in a short period of time, right? So all these auditing things that you were starting to face, many templates. I remember when we were doing the project, as you mentioned, we had templates in English, in Spanish, in Portuguese. We had to train people in different time zones, in different countries, right? With different cultures also. And we were trying to keep them part of the project, part of the decisions we were making, because the idea was not to change too much their process, right? But to bring a better solution and a better tool that would make not only the legal life better, but only also the sales team life better, the client life better, because now they have the contract signed online in their email. They can reach and go through the calls anytime that they need to. So yeah, a lot of challenge in the middle of the IPO and having to move your team to work online when COVID faced. So, and time was a pretty important item on this project. So you mentioned all the challenge, then you chose DocuSign CLM to be your tool to solve these problems. And Luisa, walk us through how was your journey since you started implementing DocuSign CLM back in November of 2020?
Sure, Gabby. First of all, today we have a procurement area, which I love, by the way, my newly founded procurement area. But at that time, we didn't have this area, which basically helps us today, assessing these vendors and seeing which vendor makes more sense for VTEX culture and for our needs, etc. So literally, the legal team started researching, what did we need? What type of tool we needed? So first of all, we listed the criteria of what we were looking for, right? So first of all, we needed a global tool because we were growing fast. Of course, we're still mainly a Brazilian Latam oriented company, but we needed a tool that would help us in this global growth. So we were looking for a tool that would help us in English and that would have, people helping us all over the world if needed in terms of assistance and customer experience. We needed a tool that would track changes in the contract. So for instance, if there was an exchange, was a alteration in a clause, if somebody needed to approve something. So this was something else that we were looking for. We were also worried about the repository, which is basically where we would store all these contracts, right? As Gabby mentioned, and as I mentioned afterwards, the physical contracts, we needed to digitalize them, but there would be no use in that if they were, in one individual's drive or in an individual's emails, and then another person from another area which would need to access this document wouldn't be able to do so. So we needed a centralized repository where we would find all these documents and it would be easy to be identified by content also, which is another problem that we had, like where can I find, I don't know, contract signed from 2002 to 2006 that would have, a certain clause that I'm looking for. So these are the things that I was looking for in these software solutions. And also another important thing that we saw in CLM was the library clause, which is basically these alternate clauses that would give, a lot of autonomy to the teams that were managing these contracts, that would be able to, adapt them to their needs in a quick speed, and that wouldn't depend on the legal team at the end of the day. So we started looking at a lot of solutions, and to be quite frank, CLM actually had all these things that we were looking for and more. They were already our partners because we already used their e-signature solution. So it was very easy for us, having this relationship with them that was very good from the past, to trust them that their solution CLM would also help us in the future. And the only thing is, Gabby, and this is where you came along, is that we needed this to be implemented very quickly. I am a lawyer, and I know, we joke in VTEX that we're legal tech and that we have a lot of skills that standard lawyers wouldn't have, but project management, unfortunately, isn't one of them. And I saw at that time that I'm like, okay, so I'm choosing this tool. I know that's going to help me, but how am I going to implement this really, really quick? And that's where I found Spaulding Ridge, basically, and found you, Gabby.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Luisa, because clients usually ask us how it should work with a partner to implement the tool that they are buying, right? So you had a relationship with DocuSign already. You were a client of their e-signature tool. Then you were expanding to CLM and you needed someone with previous experience on implementing CLM, right? And then this is where Spaulding Ridge came to the project back in November of 2020. And here at Spaulding, we all work under the assumption that all business is personal, meaning that we try to understand the culture of the client, how the client works, which kind of tool the client prefer. For communication, for example, is it Slack, is it email, Microsoft Teams, and we are trying to adapt because we know the client, we already have a lot of change to go through, and we don't want to be one of these chains, right? We want to support you, so we tailor, and I try to do that, tailoring my project management skills and the tool sets to match what VTEX was using. So the change could be minimal to the project team that was working in the project. And this is something important to mention because we had the growth operations team supporting with Salesforce. They were learning DocuSign CLM at the same time we were implementing. Then we had all the lawyers and the legal team with us, the sales team from different countries with different process supporting us during the requirements phase. So this was something we did country by country. So it wasn't one process fits all. We have different workflows to match the different templates, documents, and countries, how they work. For some countries, the workflow is a little bit with 5, 6 actors. For another, we don't need 5 or 6 actors. So we had 2, 3, finance, legal, who signs first. All this order could be tailored as we discussed the requirements. And I was PMing the project with the DocuSign team, building the tool and building the workflow. So at the end of the day, Luisa, you had to work with two partners, us leading the PM side and the DocuSign providing the tool. How was it for you? How complex or better you think was to work with two partners?
To be quite honest, Gabby, you were absolutely essential to the project. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin with. And as you said, you had previous experience implementing this. And one thing that I found was very fantastic is that I remember the first meetings, you were very observative. I mean, you wouldn't say that much. I'm like, is she getting what I need? Like, is she understanding what is VTEX's need and the, urgency of all this? And then I realized that you were really observing us to understand not only what we needed, but also how we worked. So we are very fast in VTEX, for instance. So it's very hard for us to find good partners that understand the speed that we need to implement things. And you were great in this, Gabby. And I think you pointed out something that's very important, which is you guys already, obviously, we found out about Spaulding Ridge because DocuSign indicated you guys as well. So that was another important thing. You guys were already partners in the past. And I think you were sort of the balance between what we needed from DocuSign and what you understood was important for us and translated to them. So basically, you were the bridge between us asking for improvements in the software because sometimes that is needed and that is what is asked for to them. And you saying to us sometimes, okay, so this is not possible now, but we're going to work on this in the project in the long run and to structure all this. So it was very good to have you as a partner in this whole process, Gabby. And especially with the business, the growth operations team, which you mentioned. It's important to point out and praise them as well because this started off as a legal team project, but in the end of the day, the BI intelligence team of VTEX started getting their hands on the project. And the idea the whole time along was Gabby is going to be here to focus on our IPO readiness, and then she would hand over a lot of the knowledge and help them project management wise to the team internally to continue to develop this project. So this was what was done. And Gabby, your help was essential and super important for this process. So I thank you, as I've thanked you many times before. You were absolutely important for us to be able to implement this successfully and actually being implemented successfully, because this is not an end
Yes.
game for us because it's still going. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, for sure. I imagine you have so many more templates that you can explore, right? Not only for the
Yeah.
legal team, but possibly for other areas in the company, right? The procurement team could use your storage. The HR team could have their templates and their workflows in the DocuSign CLM. So definitely the tool is not only for the legal team or for sales agreements, but it could be, as we mentioned, a global for all departments in the company. Yeah. Well, thanks, Luisa. Thanks. It was for sure a complex project. And you now has a unique experience, right? Because again, I will say it because it was so important. So you were managing the team working from home when COVID hit. You were preparing for an IPO and you were implementing a new tool from scratch with two partners. So what would you suggest for other companies that are going through this path?
That's a great question. Organization for was the solution for this problem of mine particularly, but other companies who are looking to adopt a tool like CLM, I think you need to think about what are your priorities. What do you need? Like, why would you need this tool? Because these tools sometimes don't justify, like the pricing, and sometimes your CFO is going to say, "Oh, but this is so expensive. Why do I need this?" So what I would tell, internal legal teams or business intelligence team is first map out your problems that you have today, like we did and like I discussed in the beginning. Afterwards, prioritize what is important for you risk-wise, that you have to solve first so that you would need a tool like this. And second, think about strategically how you would implement this and which teams you need to involve right off the bat. Because if you have the buy-in of the legal, in my case, the growth operations team, everybody is on board for the implementation. This helps a lot because if it's just one team saying we need to implement this tool, and as Gabby said, it involves everyone in the end of the day. If you just have the buy-in of one team, probably you will see a lot of more problems during the process of implementation that if you had the buy-in of other teams as well. So I think these were the important things, you know, mapping out the problems, prioritizing, and getting on board everybody that needs to get on board. And in some cases, in some companies, you need to get the C-levels on board, because in the end of the day, this impacts them as well. Our C-levels are using these tools as well. You know, they're signing via CLM DocuSign. And yeah, and I would start off with that and organization, because in my case with the IPO and working from home was, you know, a challenge as itself, but organizing the whole thing, and obviously having a project manager to do that and organize your life. And I would, you know, make jokes to Gabby, like, Gabby, you're literally organizing my life and the company's life, because she would, you know, in the midst of the chaos, point out things that maybe I wasn't seeing. So having a project manager to lead this whole process, to me, was very important, to be quite frank. So I would say that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Luisa. Yeah, and time flies, right? We are almost at the end here, our 30 minutes. And again, I appreciate, my last question would be around, so we started this conversation on the challenge you were facing before choosing a tool. Then we spoke a little bit about the challenge you faced while implementing the tool. And now you are months ahead of using the tool in almost 10 different countries, as we mentioned, in 3 languages. So to close out, what do you think was the best thing that happened for your team? How did the CLM tool improve your life after we closed the first phase of the project 4 months ago, and you had 80% of people using the tools in 4 months, which is an excellent number for any adoption of tool, meaning your team did a great job on enabling and training the users, the sales team supporting the sales team on how to use the tool, what is the best tricks in here. So what was the advantage you saw now that the phase 1 is completed?
I'd like to update this number. We're actually at 93% engagement,
Oh,
and we expanded, because when it was 80%, it wasn't all regions. Now we're expanded. We just implemented in the US and in other regions, so we came up to 93%, which is a great result. And I think the best outcome that we had was, first of all, of course, we are more organized. I can generate reports. I can tell my audits, external audits, what's going on, and I'm not, you know, crazy, you know, asking people to, where is its contract, where is other contract. So this was a really important gain, and for us, who is a company listed in the New York Stock Exchange now, we need this type of, you know, reassurance and governance rules. But not only that, I think it sped up the sales process for the sales team in some way, because now we have a very clear step-by-step process via this automation. You know, like, things got really lost before. We had no process. Everything was very and so chaotic that we used to lose track of things. So now the sales team are performing better, and the legal team is also very happy, because now we are not, you know, receiving requests from different, this is something that I didn't mention as well, but we used to receive contracts via WhatsApp. I am not joking, via WhatsApp, via email, via every single tool you can imagine. Now we have this one place where everything is tracked, and this makes the whole work process for us and for the other internal customers, right? The sales team, the customer experience team, working with us happier. So this has been, you know, very good outcome in terms of speed. I would say, like, speed and organization would be the things that I would point out the most as most beneficial.
and I'm glad that now your team was not affected by WhatsApp yesterday, right? Being offline.
No.
So yeah.
Zero factors, thank God.
Well, Luisa, thanks again for having us. It was a great chat. We appreciate the time. We appreciate the opportunity of partner with you and with VTEX. And I thank everyone who attended here today, and we'll be sharing the record soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gabby.